In the early winter dusk, the streets of rural Oregon seemed to hold their breath beneath a heavy, expectant silence. The first true snowstorm of the season was piling up along the fences, smothering the last remnants of autumn. The Christmas lights on Diane Mercer's porch flickered like distant lighthouses, guiding nothing but the wind and a scattering of dry leaves across the empty lane. Diane, retired now after nearly 4 decades as the town's favorite librarian, stood in her kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the storm wrap its arms around her quiet neighborhood. Her gaze wandered, half out of habit, to the bus stop down the block, a lonely patch of cracked concrete under an old streetlight, dusted white like a half-finished painting. It was usually empty this time of the year. Tonight, though, a strange shape lingered in the blue-white glow of the lamplight. It looked like a pile of discarded clothes at first, or maybe a forgotten bundle of newspapers. Diane squinted. The shape shifted ever so slightly, as if reacting to the wind, but not blown by it. A pang of unease gripped her. In a town like theirs, where everyone knew everyone and nothing ever seemed out of place, anything out of the ordinary became a magnet for worry. Diane set her cup down, slipped on her warmest boots and a thick woolen sweater, and wrapped a scarf around her neck. She hesitated at the door. The air outside was sharp enough to bite, and the snow creaked under her weight as she stepped off the porch. Each step away from her house felt more surreal. The familiar sound of her own breathing mixed with the distant howl of the wind. As she approached the bus stop, the shape became clearer. It was a child's backpack, the bright pink color nearly hidden by the accumulating snow. And inside, something alive. Diane's heart thudded. She crouched carefully, brushing aside the snow, her fingers trembling not just from the cold, but from a mounting sense of dread and urgency. She saw a small, trembling form huddled within the backpack. A pair of deep brown eyes blinked back at her, shining with confusion and fear. It was a German shepherd puppy, barely old enough to be away from its mother, shivering in the cold, its nose pressed against the soft fabric lining of the bag. A strip of blue cloth had been looped around her neck as a makeshift collar. Diane felt the world pause, her mind racing through questions she didn't dare voice. Tucked into the front pocket of the backpack was a folded piece of paper, heavy with moisture from the snow. Diane opened it with numb fingers, squinting to make out the scrawled handwriting. "Her name is Marley. Please be kind. I didn't want to leave her." The words smudged, but unmistakable. A sense of heartbreak leapt off the page. Someone had left this puppy here, in the cold, with nothing but hope and a plea for mercy. For a moment, Diane simply knelt there, snow soaking into her jeans, unable to move. The puppy, Marley, didn't make a sound, didn't whimper or bark, just stared at Diane as if she were the only thing left in the world. Diane's instincts warred within her. The urge to call the police, the animal shelter, to demand answers from a world that could do something so cruel. But as Marley's shivering grew more violent, Deirdre, the librarian's gentle heart, took over. "Hey, sweetheart," Diane whispered, her voice soft and careful. "It's okay now. You're not alone." Slowly, she reached out, letting Marley sniff her gloved hand. The puppy didn't pull away, just watched with wide, mournful eyes. Diane carefully zipped the backpack halfway to keep the warmth inside, then gathered the small bundle in her arms. Marley was lighter than she looked, bones fragile, body limp with exhaustion. Diane hurried back up the drive, the snow falling harder now, each flake thick and wet against her face. The world outside vanished into swirling white, but inside Diane's house, the fire crackled in the old stone hearth, painting the living room in gold and amber. She set the backpack gently on a plush rug by the fire, not wanting to force Marley out just yet. Instead, she fetched a soft blanket from the couch and tucked it around the open bag, creating a nest of warmth and safety. Marley watched every move, her ears flicking with every unfamiliar sound, her nose twitching at the scents of wood smoke and cinnamon. Diane sat nearby, pretending to read a book, but mostly stealing glances at her unexpected visitor. Her mind swirled with questions. Who would abandon a puppy like this? Why here, in the middle of a storm? Was the note written by a child, an adult out of options? She knew she'd need to call the shelter, post to the community board. But for tonight, all that mattered was Marley. As the hours passed, Diane spoke to the puppy in the same calm, soothing voice she'd used for frightened children in the library. She recited passages from classic novels, told stories about brave little dogs and hopeful new beginnings. Every so often, Marley would poke her head out just a little, eyes blinking in the firelight, before retreating into the familiar darkness of the backpack. The snowstorm raged outside, battering the windows and piling drifts against the porch. But inside, a fragile peace took hold, a moment suspended between loss and rescue, fear and hope. Marley, wrapped in Diane's blanket in the warmth of her home, slept at last, still hidden but no longer alone. And as Diane sat in her armchair, watching the puppy's tiny chest rise and fall, she wondered about the note's author. She couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone was out there, hoping Marley was safe, praying for a kindness in the cold. The questions pressed in around her, heavy as the snow. Why would someone leave her like this? What happened? But tonight's Sinchal, at least, that Diane could give one small, frightened soul a place to belong. And in the quiet hush of her living room, with the fire crackling and the storm outside, it felt, for just a moment, like the world could be gentle again. The old grandfather clock in Diane's hallway struck 8 as she finished laying out the last of the towels on the living room floor. The house, built a lifetime ago with wide windows and creaking boards, had always been a place of comfort, even in the harshest winters. Tonight, the snow drummed harder against the glass, the night falling thick and silent outside. Inside, Diane moved quietly, determined to offer her guests the kind of welcome she wished someone had given her in the loneliest moments of her own life. She returned to the fireplace, where Marley still lay bundled in the faded pink backpack. The puppy hadn't made a sound since Diane brought her in. No barking, no whining. Not even the soft sigh of a settled animal. Only her eyes showed signs of life, round, dark, and brimming with confusion and fear. The flames flickered across her small, trembling body, casting shadows on the wall and bathing the room in a gentle golden warmth. Diane hesitated, then crouched down and slowly unzipped the bag just a bit further. Marley stiffened, shrinking away from the light, tucking her nose against her paws. Diane withdrew her hand and settled on the rug nearby, making herself small and unthreatening. She remembered years ago, calming frightened children who'd wandered into the library to escape their own storms. Sometimes, the best thing you could do was simply be present, close enough for comfort, far enough for safety. She fetched a battered copy of Charlotte's Web from her bookshelf, its spine worn and soft from dozens of readings. Diane's voice was gentle but steady as she began to read aloud, letting the familiar words fill the quiet room. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" she read, and Marley's ears twitched at the sound. Diane kept going, sometimes pausing to look up and offer a reassuring smile, sometimes reading with her eyes half on the puppy, measuring the subtle changes in Marley's posture and breath. For a long while, Marley stayed hidden in the backpack, barely moving, the only sign she was listening being the slight tilt of her head and the occasional, almost inaudible sigh. Diane continued reading, her voice like a steady river, sometimes playful, sometimes somber, but always patient. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Marley shifted. First she stuck her nose out, sniffing the air as if testing the safety of this strange new world. Then, tentatively, she poked her head out, her gaze fixed on Diane. It was the smallest gesture, a barely perceptible movement, but to Diane, it felt like a miracle. She smiled and kept reading, resisting the urge to reach out or speak directly. Every few minutes, Marley would retreat back into the backpack, then peer out again, curiosity beginning to override her fear. As the clock ticked on, Diane fetched a small dish of water and set it beside the bag, careful not to make any sudden movements. She left a handful of dry puppy kibble on a plate, placing it within Marley's reach, but not too close, giving the dog space to make her own decision. Marley sniffed at the air, but did not budge. Diane glanced at the note again, the one she'd found tucked in the backpack. The handwriting, jagged and rushed, replayed in her mind. Please be kind. I didn't want to leave her. The heartbreak in those words echoed in the silence. She wondered if Marley could sense the love that lingered there, mixed with so much sadness. Diane settled herself on the couch, leaving the fireplace flickering, the warmth radiating outward, and opened her journal. Writing had always been her refuge, a way to process the world when it grew too heavy to carry inside. She scribbled quickly, her thoughts spilling across the page. She's not just waiting, she's hoping. There's a difference, you know. Waiting is passive. Hoping is brave. This little one, she's brave, even if she doesn't know it yet. Hours slipped by, and the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside, time seemed suspended. Marley finally emerged halfway from the backpack, the blanket Diane had tucked inside now wrapped snugly around her shoulders. She sniffed the air, looked at Diane, and then, slowly, carefully, took her first few steps onto the rug. Her legs trembled, more from fear than cold, but she stood her ground. Diane didn't react, didn't reach out, just kept her voice low and soothing. You're safe here, Marley, Diane murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. You can stay as long as you need. Marley's tail gave the slightest twitch, not quite a wag, but not stillness either. She sniffed the bowl of water, lapped at it, and retreated back into the backpack, curling up with her nose poking just beyond the zipper. Diane let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, relief mingling with awe at the tiny victories unfolding before her. As midnight approached, Diane prepared for bed, leaving the bedroom door ajar and the fire banked low. She set an extra blanket beside the backpack, just in case, and whispered one last good night. Upstairs, sleep came slowly. Her mind replayed the events of the evening, the sight of Marley abandoned in the snow, the shiver of fear and trust, the silent bond forming in the quiet flicker of firelight. Downstairs, Marley stayed awake for a while, her dark eyes roaming the shadows, listening to the strange, comforting sounds of this new place. The wind's howl faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of Diane's gentle breathing drifting down the stairs, the reassuring warmth of the fire, and the lingering echo of a story read aloud. In the soft hush of the first night, neither Diane nor Marley knew what tomorrow would bring. The fear of abandonment was still fresh, the wounds of being left behind raw and aching. But hope, as Diane had written, was already working its quiet magic. Marley's world had changed forever, and for the first time in a long time, she was not alone. The stillness of the house became a cocoon, sheltering both woman and puppy from the storm outside and the sorrows that had brought them together. Trust would take time, Diane knew, but in the gentle light of that first night, a fragile bridge had already begun to form, and so, as the snow piled higher against the doors and windows, Diane drifted into sleep with the faintest smile, the knowledge settling over her like a warm quilt. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness could thaw even the coldest winter night. The first rays of winter sunlight filtered through the frosted window panes, painting patterns on the living room floor. Diane woke early, as she always did, her body still attuned to the habits of a working life, opening the library at dawn, straightening shelves, welcoming the first readers. Today, though, there was no need to hurry. The storm had passed, leaving behind a dazzling, silent world of white, and the only pressing task was the puppy still curled in the backpack by the cold ashes of the fireplace. She made her way downstairs, pausing on the last step to listen. The house was quiet. In the center of the living room, Marley remained a silent, unmoving lump, the pink of her backpack only just visible beneath the tangle of blankets. Diane smiled softly. In the soft light, Marley looked both heartbreakingly small and strangely hopeful, as if the very act of surviving the night had been a leap of faith. Diane knelt nearby and spoke in a low, gentle voice. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay?" Marley blinked up at her, unblinking and wary, but didn't retreat further. Diane took this as progress, a tiny crack in the shell of fear the little dog carried with her. She refreshed the bowl of water added some warm broth, and set out another small handful of puppy kibble. This time, Marley sniffed at the food, then looked back at Diane. It took nearly 15 minutes of silent watching before Marley crept out, one paw at a time, her belly close to the ground, like a wild animal unsure of her welcome. Diane stayed still, her hands folded in her lap, pretending to read the newspaper. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Marley take a tentative nibble, then a second, then retreat quickly back into the backpack, chewing slowly as if savoring every bite. That first day stretched on in a pattern of cautious exploration and retreat. Marley would emerge, sniff at her surroundings, maybe circle the room once or twice, then rush back to the safety of the backpack, if Diane so much as shifted in her chair. Diane understood. Trauma lingered, even in creatures too young to name it. She gave Marley the gift of time and space, letting the puppy set the pace of their new life together. By mid-morning, Diane picked up the phone and began making calls. She started with the local animal shelter. No missing German Shepherd puppies reported this week, the volunteer told her apologetically. Are you sure she doesn't have a microchip? Diane promised to check, though she doubted it. She rang the nearby vet clinics, posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, and even sent emails to the school district in case any child had mentioned a lost dog. No one seemed to know anything about a missing puppy named Marley. And the backpack, bright pink, a child's handwriting on the inner flap, offered no new clues. Each time she recounted the story, the shape in the snow, the heartbreaking note, Diane felt a pang of helplessness. The world was full of lost things, she thought, but rarely did someone make such a deliberate plea for kindness. She posted a gentle notice on the bulletin board at the corner grocery store. Found German Shepherd puppy, female, approx. 3 months. Pink backpack, safe and warm. Please call if you know her story. She included her phone number and a small drawing of a dog, hoping it might catch the right person's eye. Or while she waited, Diane began to chronicle her days in a battered leather-bound journal, her handwriting looping across the pages in a soothing rhythm. She recorded every tiny detail of Marley's progress, the moment she accepted a treat from Diane's hand, the first time she circled the living room on her own, the hesitant, hopeful glance she gave before settling by Diane's feet. Diane wrote about the way Marley's eyes never quite left the front door, how she seemed always on the edge of anticipation, as if waiting for a familiar face to appear and bring her home. She's not just waiting. She's hoping, Diane wrote one evening as Marley dozed by the fire. It's the kind of hope that aches, a stubborn, wild thing that refuses to give up, even when the world seems cold and empty. She waits for someone. She believes they'll come. The days passed in a slow, gentle rhythm. Each morning, Marley ventured a little farther from her backpack, sniffing at Diane's slippers, investigating the strange smells of coffee and cinnamon and the faint scent of pine carried in from outside. Sometimes she barked, soft, uncertain sounds, at the mailman or the creak of the porch swing in the wind. Diane celebrated every sign of progress, no matter how small. She introduced Marley to the backyard, letting her explore the snow-covered grass on a long leash. At first, Marley shivered and tried to back away, but then she seemed to remember the joys of the outdoors. Nose down, tail wagging just a little, she chased her own shadow across the drifts. Diane laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in weeks, and Marley looked up as if surprised by the warmth in her voice. Still, and each evening, as the sun dipped behind the evergreens and the sky flushed pink and violet, Marley returned to the backpack. It was her safe place, her shelter against a world that had once left her behind. Diane never tried to take it away, understanding that everyone, human or animal, needed a refuge. On the third night, Diane sat cross-legged on the rug, Marley curled up beside her. The phone, as silent for days, buzzed with a message from a neighbor. No luck on the dog, but I hope you'll keep her. She looks like she's found her home. Diane smiled and stroked Marley's soft fur, whispering, We'll figure it out, sweetheart. One step at a time. But the mystery gnawed at her. Who had left Marley? Why the careful note, the pink backpack, the trust that a stranger would do the right thing? Diane began to search for patterns, scanning the news for stories of families in crisis, pets abandoned, or children missing from school. She found nothing, just the ordinary ache of small-town life, the everyday losses that no one but the lonely noticed. Marley's presence began to change Diane too. She found herself rising early to watch the sun rise, walking longer routes through the snowy wood, smiling at neighbors she hadn't spoken to in months. The world, once narrow and quiet, seemed to grow with every small act of care. Still, every night before bed, Diane knelt by the backpack and whispered a promise to Marley. "I'll find out who you're waiting for. I promise." As the days of waiting stretched on, hope grew quietly in the corners of the house, fragile but persistent. Marley, no longer just a frightened shape in the snow, became the gentle heartbeat of Diane's days. A reminder that, sometimes, the things we find are the things we need most. Winter in rural Oregon had a way of making even small mysteries feel monumental. The snow, which just days ago felt like an isolating force, now seemed to serve as a canvas, blank, waiting for signs, clues, or anything that might explain how a puppy named Marley ended up beneath a lonely streetlight. For Diane, each morning began with fresh determination. She told herself that someone, somewhere, must be looking for Marley. There had to be a story behind the pink backpack in the desperate note. But every phone call, every email, and every trip to the community board ended in the same hopeful, gentle disappointment. On Thursday morning, as Diane sipped her coffee and peered out at the sun glittering on the snowbanks, she noticed Marley watching her with quiet interest. The puppy had begun venturing further from her backpack, following Diane from room to room, ears perked and eyes alert. The house felt different now, a little brighter, a little less lonely. But the question of Marley's past clung to Diane like the winter chill. Determined, Diane took a new approach. She logged into the local neighborhood forum, a patchwork of old friends, parents, retired teachers, and newcomers all bound by the invisible threads of small-town life. She typed a post with a fresh photo of Marley curled on her rug. Found German Shepherd puppy, pink backpack, note attached, looking for information. Has anyone heard about a missing pet or family needing help? Please share. Within minutes, a few neighbors replied with sympathetic comments, but no leads. Diane refreshed the page over and over, heart sinking a little more each time. She decided to call her friend Joyce, a retired teacher who seemed to know every family in town. If anyone had heard whispers about a child in trouble or a lost pet, it would be Joyce. Joyce picked up on the third ring. "Diane, how's retirement treating you?" Diane laughed, her voice lighter than she felt. "Busier than you'd think, Joyce. Listen, I found a puppy, abandoned, but clearly loved. Do you remember hearing anything about a child with a German Shepherd?" Joyce went silent for a moment. Diane could almost hear her thinking. "You know, now that you mention it, there was a boy last month, Eli Sanders. His case broke my heart. He cried every day after being placed in foster care. His teacher said he talked about a dog he left behind. Big, loyal, wouldn't leave his side. His foster mom said she couldn't take animals, but he kept hoping someone would save his dog." Diane felt her heart twist. She clutched the phone tighter. "Do you know where Eli is now?" "I think he's with a new family, out by the river," Joyce replied. "Let me ask around. Maybe the school counselor would know more." After hanging up, Diane's mind spun with possibilities. Was Marley really Eli's dog? Was that why she clung to the backpack, waiting by the door, never quite settling in? Was there hope for Eli, the reason her eyes always darted to the sound of footsteps outside? That afternoon, Diane called the school counselor, Mrs. Haywood. The conversation was cautious at first, privacy laws, the need for discretion, but when Diane explained about Marley and the note, Mrs. Haywood's voice softened. "Eli did have a German Shepherd puppy," Mrs. Haywood confirmed. "He named her Marley. When his mother lost custody, Eli was placed in foster care quickly. There wasn't time for him to say goodbye. He kept telling us he'd come back for her, but I don't think he ever really believed it could happen. He's been struggling, lonely, quiet. He draws pictures of Marley in class sometimes. A cold ache settled in Diane's chest. The backpack, the note, Marley's refusal to let go of hope, it all made sense now. Marley wasn't just lost. She was waiting for someone she loved more than anything in the world. "Would you be willing to arrange a meeting?" Diane asked. "Maybe just to see if Eli can visit. Marley needs closure." "So does he." Mrs. Haywood agreed to reach out to Eli's foster family and promised to let Diane know as soon as possible. That night, Diane sat beside Marley, reading softly from her journal. She stroked Marley's fur and whispered, "You're braver than you know. We're going to try, little one, I promise." Over the next few days, Diane watched Marley closely, marveling at her resilience. The puppy grew bolder, following Diane outside to fetch the newspaper or exploring the yard in short, cautious bursts. But each time a car drove by or footsteps crunched in the snow, Marley would rush to the door, tail stiff, ears forward, eyes shining with desperate hope. Sometimes Diane found her curled in the backpack, nose pressed into the fabric, eyes squeezed shut as if willing the world to bring Eli back. Diane's heart broke a little each time. She wrote in her journal, "I've never seen hope so stubborn, so pure. It's like she knows the world can still be kind, even when it's broken." One morning, a new comment popped up on Diane's forum post. Someone remembered seeing a young boy with a German Shepherd at the park months ago. He was always talking to her, like she understood every word. Said her name was Marley. It wasn't much, but it was another thread tying Marley's past to Eli. The town began to rally quietly around Marley's story. A neighbor dropped off a box of dog treats. A child from down the street drew a picture of Marley and taped it to Diane's mailbox, with "Welcome Home" in wobbly crayon letters. Diane felt the town's collective empathy, people reaching out in small ways, their kindness folding gently around Marley and Diane alike. Late that Friday, Mrs. Haywood called with news. Eli's foster family agreed to a supervised meeting at the local park. Tomorrow afternoon. He's been asking about Marley every day since I mentioned her. I think this could be good for both of them." Diane hung up, hands trembling with anticipation and nerves. She turned to Marley, who sat at her feet, head cocked. "Do you want to see your boy, Marley?" she asked softly. Marley wagged her tail, still cautious, but undeniably hopeful. That night, as snow fell gently outside and the fireplace warmed the living room, Diane lay awake, thinking of all the ways hope connected people, across distance, heartaches, and silent winter nights. She realized that sometimes finding the truth required more than searching for facts. It meant listening to the stories that lived in others' hearts. Tomorrow, Marley might find the piece of herself she'd lost. Tomorrow, a boy and his dog might discover that love could bridge even the hardest of goodbyes. And as Diane finally drifted to sleep, Marley nestled by her side. The world felt just a little bit brighter, a place where clues and connections, though fragile, could change everything. Saturday arrived with the soft hush of fresh snow falling, blanketing the town in a new, gentle white. Diane woke before dawn, her nerves twisting with anticipation and worry. Today was the day Marley might finally see her boy again. The day hope and heartbreak would meet in a quiet corner of the local park. Diane moved through her morning in slow, careful motions, brewing coffee, bundling herself in her thickest coat, slipping extra treats and Marley's favorite blanket into a tote bag. All the while, Marley watched her, head tilted, tail thumping the floor in anxious, hopeful beats. By late morning, the clouds parted, letting in thin slivers of sunlight that danced across the ice-laced trees. Diane clipped on Marley's leash, her hands shaking just enough to make the task fiddly. Marley, for her part, seemed to sense that something momentous was coming. She pressed close to Diane's leg, not pulling away, but not lagging either. As they stepped onto the porch, Marley glanced back at the house one last time, then at the old backpack Diane had set by the door, her anchor, her memory, her shelter. The walk to the park was longer than usual, and Diane felt every step. With each crunch of snow underfoot, her mind raced with questions. Would Eli recognize Marley? Would Marley recognize Eli after all this time? Would it hurt more if they did? Or if they didn't? She looked down at Marley, who trotted quietly at her side, her breath puffing in white clouds, her eyes alert and searching. When they reached the small park near the river, Diane's heart began to pound. The playground was mostly empty, save for a pair of bundled-up children sledding on the far hill. In the center of the clearing stood a small group: Mrs. Haywood, the school counselor, and a tall, thin boy with tousled brown hair. Eli. He wore a red scarf, and an expression that flickered between hope and fear, his gloved hands twisting anxiously in front of him. His foster mother stood beside him, watching with quiet support. Diane paused at the edge of the field, letting Marley set the pace. At first, Marley hesitated, sniffing the air, her whole body tense. Then, suddenly, her ears pricked, and her tail began to wag in wild, sweeping arcs. Her head snapped up, eyes locking onto Eli. For a heartbeat, everything stood still, the world narrowed to a single line, drawn between a boy and his dog. And then Marley barked, a sharp, clear sound that split the cold air. Not a sound of warning or fear, but pure recognition, pure joy. She lunged forward, nearly pulling the leash from Diane's hand, racing across the snowy grass. Diane unclipped the leash, barely thinking, and Marley shot toward Eli in a blur of black and tan fur. Eli saw her coming and fell to his knees, arms open wide. "Marley!" he cried, his voice cracking, tears already streaking his cheeks. Marley barreled into him, licking his face, wiggling and whining in frantic bursts of happiness. Eli wrapped his arms around her, pressing his forehead to hers, his whole body shaking with sobs and laughter. "I told her I'd come back. I promised," he gasped between breaths, his voice full of raw, aching relief. The world seemed to fade for a moment, no sound but the snow falling, no movement but the desperate, joyful embrace of a boy and his dog, finally reunited. Diane watched from a few feet away, tears stinging her own eyes. Mrs. Haywood dabbed at her cheeks, whispering, "Oh, thank God," under her breath. Even Eli's foster mother looked moved, a small, hopeful smile curving her lips. Marley circled Eli again and again, barking and whining, pressing her nose to his chest, his hands, his face, as if checking every inch of him to make sure he was real. She leaned her full weight into his lap, finally curling into a tight ball, as Eli stroked her ears and whispered, "I missed you, girl. I missed you so much." The pain of separation and the joy of reunion tangled together, raw and palpable. After a long, trembling moment, Diane approached quietly, crouching beside them. "She never stopped hoping you'd come back," she said softly, reaching out to scratch Marley's chin. "She waited for you every day, slept by the door, wouldn't let go of your backpack." Eli looked up at Diane with red, shining eyes. "I was so scared she'd be gone. I left her the backpack so she'd have something that smelled like me. I wanted her to feel safe." He wiped his nose on his sleeve, still clutching Marley with his other hand. "Thank you for taking care of her. It's been my honor," Diane replied, her voice thick. "She's brave, just like you." Mrs. Haywood stepped closer, kneeling down so she was at Eli's level. "We're so glad you get to see her, Eli. I know this isn't how you wanted things, but Marley's been safe and loved, just like you asked." The adults gave the boy and his dog some space. Diane sat on a nearby bench, watching Marley and Eli rediscover each other through quiet murmurs and eager licks. Eli pulled something from his coat pocket, a small stuffed bear, faded and well-loved, and tucked it beside Marley's paws. "I saved this for you," he whispered, "so you'd never forget me." For a time, they existed in their own small world. Eli told Marley about his new school, his worries, his dreams. Marley listened the way only a dog can, Her ears perked, eyes wide, every ounce of her attention devoted to Eli. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged in love and longing, tempered by loss. Eventually, Mrs. Haywood and Eli's foster mother exchanged a glance. "It's almost time to go, Eli," Mrs. Haywood said gently. We can't take Marley home. You know that? But we're working on something. What? I promise." Eli nodded, though his jaw trembled. He looked at Diane, pleading. Can I visit her? Can I write to her? I just want to know she's okay." Diane smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility and the gift of trust. "Of course you can visit. You can write as often as you want. Marley will always be here, waiting for you. And you're always welcome in our home, Eli." As they prepared to leave, Eli hugged Marley one last time, burying his face in her fur. Marley whimpered softly, as if she knew this was another goodbye. "I love you, girl," Eli whispered. "You're the best dog in the whole world." Diane placed a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder. "She'll be waiting for you. I promise. She's part of your story. And now, you're both part of mine." They left the park in a flurry of hugs, tears, and promises. Marley watched Eli go, tail drooping, but this time there was no fear in her eyes. Only the knowledge that love could stretch across distance and time. As Diane and Marley walked home, the sun dipping behind the clouds, Diane knew nothing would ever be quite the same. The pain of parting lingered, but so did the joy of reunion. The knowledge that hope, no matter how fragile, could sometimes carry you home. And in that quiet, snowy park, under the winter sky, a new chapter began for Marley, for Eli, and for Diane. A chapter written in forgiveness, in second chances, and in the unwavering promise of love. The drive back from the park was nearly silent. Diane kept one hand lightly on the steering wheel, the other resting atop Marley's head as the German Shepherd lay curled on the back seat, her stuffed bear clutched tight between her paws. The reunion with Eli had left Marley subdued, her eyes thoughtful and distant. As if she were still processing the collision of hope and loss, Diane glanced at her in the rearview mirror and felt the ache, sharp and tender, of wanting to give Marley everything she'd ever lost. When they arrived home, Marley trotted directly to the front door, her nose twitching. She hesitated at the threshold as if waiting for someone else to follow her in. Diane let out a quiet sigh and knelt down, gently stroking Marley's fur. "He loves you, you know. He always will. You did so good today, sweetheart." Marley nuzzled Diane's hand, but her gaze lingered on the empty road outside. Inside, Diane made a cup of chamomile tea and set about tidying the living room, her thoughts racing. The house felt both full and empty at once, as if Eli's visit had left a hopeful echo behind. Marley, meanwhile, found her way back to her familiar spot near the fireplace. This time, though, she brought the stuffed bear Eli had given her and tucked it beside the old pink backpack, her little shrine to memory, hope, and home. Later that evening, the phone rang. Diane recognized the number. Mrs. Haywood, the school counselor. She answered quickly, her heart beating fast. "I wanted to thank you again for today," Mrs. Haywood began. "It meant so much to Eli. He hasn't smiled like that in months, but I have to ask, would you be willing to keep Marley long-term, at least until Eli's foster situation changes? His foster family simply can't have dogs. It's not allowed in their apartment." Diane thought for a long moment. The answer had always been yes. She felt it in the quiet way Marley had started following her from room to room, in the hopeful way she watched the door every evening, and in the peace that settled over the house when Marley curled up by her feet. Of course," Diane replied softly, "but I want Eli to stay involved. He can visit whenever his foster family allows. He can write letters, draw pictures, whatever he needs. I'll keep everything for Marley. I promise she'll always know how much he loves her." Mrs. Haywood sounded relieved and perhaps a little choked up. "Thank you, Diane. Truly, sometimes love means trusting someone else to care." After she hung up, Diane sat down beside Marley and began to talk. She explained things as she would to a child, softly, gently, always honest. "You're going to stay with me, Marley, for as long as you need. But Eli's not gone. He's just somewhere else for now. You'll see him again. I promise." Marley's response was a slow, heavy sigh, a settling into acceptance, the way only a dog could truly surrender to the strange terms of love and loss. The next few days unfolded in a new rhythm. Diane established small routines to comfort both herself and Marley. Each morning, she walked Marley along the winding paths near the river, letting her run and sniff and roll in the last patches of snow. Each afternoon, she read aloud from Eli's letters. Short, hopeful notes sent via Mrs. Haywood, filled with news of school, drawings of Marley with impossibly large eyes, and promises that he would come to visit soon. One day, a package arrived. Inside was a collar, handmade from braided blue yarn, and a note. "For Marley, so she remembers she's always loved." Diane fastened the collar gently around Marley's neck, her hands trembling. Marley sniffed at it, then trotted around the living room, her tail wagging more confidently than it had in weeks. Marley, it seemed, understood the strange beauty of her situation, loved by two people, neither of whom could claim her entirely for themselves. She began to flourish in Diane's care. The backpack remained her safe place, always nearby. But Marley now explored every room of the house. She napped in sunbeams, learned to rest her head in Diane's lap during quiet afternoons, and even started greeting the neighbors with cautious, wagging enthusiasm. Diane, in turn, found her own heart opening in unexpected ways. She joined a local dog-walking group, met friends for coffee, and even began writing a blog about Marley's journey, calling it Backpacks and Second Chances. The blog quickly gained a small following, with neighbors and strangers alike sending kind messages, photos of their own pets, and words of encouragement. Eli's presence was felt everywhere. Every letter, every picture, every promise kept Marley connected to him and reminded Diane of the invisible threads that bind people, art, and animals together as through love, loss, and hope. One cold, clear afternoon, Diane took Marley for a drive to the school where Eli attended. They parked near the playground and watched from a distance as children played in the snow. Marley perked up, ears forward, searching for a familiar voice in the wind. She didn't see Eli that day, but Diane felt the connection, a silent promise that someday soon they would all meet again. That night, Diane wrote in her journal, "Sometimes love means letting go of what you want so someone else can have what they need. Sometimes it means trusting that a piece of your heart can live happily in someone else's care." Marley seemed to understand. Each night, she curled up beside the old backpack in Eli's bear, her breathing slow and steady, the flicker of the fire painting gold in her fur. Diane would sit nearby, reading or writing, sometimes simply watching Marley sleep, grateful for the quiet magic of their shared home. One evening, as Diane prepared for bed, she found Marley sitting at the window, staring up at the moon. The night was silent, the snow sparkling under the soft silver glow. Diane sat beside her and placed a gentle hand on Marley's back. "He loves you, Marley, and so do I. That's what love looks like. Sometimes it means trusting someone else to keep you safe, even when you can't be together." And in that moment, Diane knew that even as Marley's story had begun with heartbreak and waiting, it was now unfolding in hope and healing. A testament to the courage it takes to love, to let go, and to believe in second chances. As March arrived, the days grew longer, and the snow along the sidewalks melted into sparkling ribbons beneath the Oregon sun. With every passing week, Marley's spirit seemed to grow stronger, brighter, more confident. The backpack, which once served as her only refuge, now sat quietly in the corner, still cherished, but less needed, as Marley discovered new joys in her second chance at life. For Diane, the transformation was nothing short of a miracle, unfolding in small, beautiful ways. Early one morning, as Diane sipped her coffee and watched the mist rise from the fields beyond her backyard, she noticed Marley watching her with clear, eager eyes. There was a question there, and Diane found herself grinning. "Ready for our big day, Marley?" she asked, reaching for the leash, and Marley's new blue collar, the one Eli had braided for her. Marley's tail thumped the floor in a happy, eager rhythm. It was a day Diane had long planned for. Marley's first session as a therapy dog in training. Diane had read about the program at the local elementary school, a place where gentle dogs help shy or struggling children find comfort in reading. It was Mrs. Haywood who first suggested Marley might be perfect for the role. "She's calm, patient, and she's lived through things most children only read about," the counselor had said. "She'll know just how to listen." Their drive to the school was filled with gentle excitement. Diane spoke to Marley in a low, soothing voice about what to expect, reminding her that she was safe, that she could always return to the backpack if she needed. Marley listened, head out the window, soaking in the new scents and sights. When they arrived, Diane knelt beside Marley and clipped on her special vest. The vest was small, blue, with a patch that read, "Therapy Dog in Training." Marley looked at her, then pressed her head gently against Diane's knee, as if to say she understood. Together, they walked into the cheerful, bustling halls of the elementary school. Their first stop was the library, a cozy room lined with bright posters and stacks of picture books. The children were already gathered in a loose circle on the carpet, their voices hushed with curiosity. Mrs. Haywood introduced Marley and Diane, explaining that Marley was here to listen to stories and to help anyone who wanted to read aloud. At first, the children seemed uncertain, glancing at each other, unsure what to expect. Marley, sensing their nerves, walked slowly among them, tail wagging gently. She sniffed a little girl's outstretched hand, then settled at the feet of a boy who sat alone, his eyes glued to the floor. "Would you like to read to Marley?" Diane asked softly. The boy hesitated, but Marley simply rested her head on his knee, waiting. Eventually, the boy picked up a picture book and began to read, his voice barely a whisper. Marley didn't move, didn't interrupt. She just listened, calm and attentive. With every page, the boy's voice grew steadier, more confident. By the end of the story, he was reading loud enough for the others to hear. One by one, more children took their turn. A girl who rarely spoke above a whisper read an entire chapter with Marley's head in her lap. A child who had trouble sitting still found peace in stroking Marley's ears as she listened to a story about lost and found. In that room, Marley was more than a rescued dog. She was a rescuer, offering gentle, wordless encouragement to anyone who needed it. After their session, Mrs. Haywood caught Diane's arm and whispered, "I haven't seen some of these kids open up like that in months. Marley is something special." Diane smiled, pride and gratitude warming her from within. The next week, Diane and Marley visited a memory care center for elderly patients. Here, Marley's calmness and intuition worked a different kind of magic. She made her way from chair to chair, pausing so residents could stroke her fur, sometimes resting her head on a trembling hand or licking a wrinkled cheek. People who rarely spoke reached out to Marley, their eyes lighting up with recognition and joy. One woman, lost in dementia, murmured the name Sasha, mistaking Marley for a beloved dog from her youth, and wept softly as Marley stayed with her, providing silent comfort. Diane documented every experience in her blog, backpacks and second chances. She shared stories, photos, and small victories, the shy child who found his voice, the elderly man who smiled for the first time in weeks. As Diane wrote, she realized Marley's impact was rippling outward, touching lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. It wasn't long before one of her posts went viral, a photo of Marley, head resting on the lap of a child in a hospital gown, with the caption, "Sometimes the smallest souls have the biggest hearts." Messages poured in from around the country, stories of dogs who had changed lives, of families who had been reunited, of strangers offering kindness to those in need. As the weeks passed, Marley's confidence blossomed. She mastered her therapy dog classes, learning to stay calm in noisy crowds, to obey commands with a gentle touch, to sense anxiety and offer comfort. Diane watched, amazed, as Marley grew from a frightened puppy hiding in a backpack into a symbol of resilience and hope for their whole community. Yet, for all her new adventures, Marley never forgot her past. Every evening, she curled up beside her old pink backpack and Eli's bear, reminders of where she'd been and whom she still loved. Diane sometimes found herself sitting with Marley, sharing stories of the day, telling her how proud Eli would be. One afternoon, Diane received a new letter from Eli, now written in careful, looping script, his confidence growing just like Marley's. He told Marley about his new school, about the friends he was making, about his dreams of visiting again soon. He drew a picture of Marley in her therapy vest, surrounded by smiling children and grown-ups. Diane read the letter aloud, and tears in her eyes. Marley listened, her ears pricked, tail thumping gently. She seemed to understand every word. That night, as Marley slept by the fire, Diane reflected on the journey they had all made together. From loss and fear to love and belonging, Marley had found her purpose, not just as a dog who had been rescued, but as one who could rescue others. Through patience, trust, and second chances, Marley was healing not only herself, but the world around her. Diane smiled, feeling hope settle over her like a warm blanket. The new life they'd built wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. And as spring whispered at the edges of the cold Oregon night, Diane knew that Marley's story, like all the best stories, had only just begun. Spring arrived slowly in rural Oregon, creeping in through windows cracked open for the first time in months, washing the house in pale sunlight and the scent of wet earth. For Diane and Marley, it felt as if the world was unfurling itself anew, offering up small miracles in every green shoot, pushing through the melting snow. Each day was brighter, each walk longer, and every night by the fireplace just a little warmer. Diane, inspired by all that had changed since Marley's arrival, decided it was time to give her friend a space of her very own. One morning, after a session at the elementary school, Diane returned home with a head full of ideas. She spent hours cleaning the sunroom, the room she'd once reserved for guests who seldom came. She scrubbed the windows until the glass shone, rolled up the faded rug, and rearranged the old wicker furniture. She hauled in Marley's favorite blankets, a basket of toys, and of course, placed the pink backpack and Eli's bear in a spot of honor beside a large, soft dog bed. She painted a sign to hang above the little corner, Marley's spot, and the room was flooded with sunlight and overlooked Orem, Diane's small garden, where daffodils now nodded in the breeze. As Diane stepped back to admire her work, Marley padded into the sunroom, nose twitching with curiosity. She circled the bed, sniffed her toys, and finally, with a satisfied sigh, curled up on her new throne, her eyes closing in contentment. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Diane found a package on her porch. It was from Eli, addressed in his careful, wobbly handwriting. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a new scarf, a cheerful bandana, hand-embroidered with Marley's name in blue and green thread. There was a note, too, for Marley, so she always feels at home. Diane tied the scarf gently around Marley's neck, then snapped a picture. Marley sitting regal and proud in her new sunroom, the sunlight casting a golden halo around her ears. Diane felt a swell of gratitude, her eyes stinging with happy tears. In that moment, she knew she had to share Marley's story with more than just their small circle. That night, Diane started her blog, Backpacks and Second Chances. She wrote her first post, telling the story of the night she found Marley in the snow, the fear and uncertainty, the quiet hope that had brought them together in all the ways Marley had begun to heal, not just herself, but others too. Diane included the photo of Marley in her scarf, the sunlight pouring in, the old pink backpack and the stuffed bear visible in the corner. She wrote about Eli, about the park reunion, and the promises they'd made to keep Marley safe, loved, and never alone. The blog grew slowly at first, with a few comments from neighbors, friends, and people from the therapy dog community. But soon, Diane noticed her posts being shared on social media, her inbox filling with messages from strangers, some sharing stories of their own rescues, others simply thanking Diane and Marley for reminding them that hope could survive, even the harshest winter. One afternoon, Diane wrote a post about a hospital visit. Marley sitting quietly with a little girl recovering from surgery, the girl's hand buried in Marley's soft fur, both of them lost in a story Diane read aloud. She attached a photo, a simple image of Marley, head resting on the girl's lap, her eyes closed in perfect trust. Within days, the post was shared thousands of times. Comments poured in. "She looks just like my childhood dog. I cried reading this. Thank you for helping others heal. Marley gives me hope that kindness can change lives." Soon, local news outlets picked up Marley's story. A reporter called, asking to visit the sunroom and meet the dog who listens. The resulting article brought more letters, more readers, and more families reaching out, some wanting to meet Marley, others offering to help. Marley's world, once so small and cold, had expanded into something vast and welcoming. The blog also became a place for Eli, a safe spot where he could send letters, drawings, and stories for Diane to share with Marley and the world. Sometimes Diane would print his letters and tape them on the sunroom wall. Other times, she would read them aloud to Marley as the dog lounged in her sunbeam, tail thumping the floor. With every new post, Diane felt the walls she'd built around her own heart softening. She wrote about the importance of second chances, about the resilience of animals and children alike, and about the small, everyday moments of healing that filled her home. She described the laughter of school children reading to Marley, the smile of an elderly woman who hadn't spoken in weeks, the comfort Marley brought just by being present. Marley, in turn, seemed to blossom with every new visit, every new story shared. She learned to sense when someone needed her, quietly nudging a shy child to read, resting her head in the lap of a grieving nurse, sitting patiently beside a trembling hand. Diane marveled at Marley's empathy, her calm, her ability to draw out hope even in the most unexpected places. One evening, as Diane finished answering blog comments, she glanced into the sunroom. Marley was curled up on her bed, Eli's scarf bright against her fur. The backpack and the bear were nestled close, reminders of the journey they'd all taken. Outside, the stars shone cold and bright, but inside the house was full of light and laughter. Diane sat down on the floor beside Marley and stroked her ears. "You know, girl," she whispered, "it's amazing how much love you've brought into this house, into the world. Sometimes I think you rescued me as much as I rescued you." As Marley leaned into her touch, Diane thought of all the families and children who had written to her, the photos of pets sleeping beside backpacks and teddy bears, the emails from teachers and hospital staff thanking her for sharing Marley's gift. Their story had reached thousands, each person, each animal, each act of kindness forming a network of hope that stretched far beyond anything Diane had imagined. That night, as Marley slept in her sunroom, her corner of safety, sunlight, and second chances, Diane wrote one final thought in her journal. It started with a backpack and a hope left in the snow, but it grew into something bigger, a reminder that even the most fragile among us can change the world, one gentle moment at a time. And with that, Diane turned out the lights, knowing that somewhere, someone would read Marley's story and find the courage to stop, to help, to believe in second chances. The first hint of summer drifted in on the breeze one afternoon, sunlight dappling through the green leaves and carrying the scent of lilacs into Diane's living room. Marley, now as much a part of the house as the old grandfather clock and the creaky wooden floorboards, lounged in her sunroom corner, chin resting on Eli's stuffed bear. The blog had brought new visitors, friends, and even volunteers, but Diane could tell Marley's thoughts sometimes wandered. Her eyes would lift at the sound of a passing car, her tail giving a hopeful thump that faded into a sigh. Then, on a bright Saturday morning, Mrs. Haywood called with a special message. Eli would be visiting with his new adoptive family. The paperwork was nearly done, his future at last settling into something sturdy. "He's so excited, Diane. All he talks about is Marley, how she changed everything for him. He made her a present, too." Diane felt her heart lift with anticipation and nerves. She cleaned Marley's sunroom corner, brushed Marley until her fur gleamed, and laid out both the old backpack and Eli's bear, just as they had been that first day. She even baked a batch of Eli's favorite oatmeal cookies, the house filling with the smell of cinnamon and vanilla. The car pulled into the driveway just after noon. Marley jumped up, ears perked, every muscle tense with anticipation. When the front door opened and Eli stepped inside, taller now, his hair a little longer, but his smile unmistakable. Marley let out a joyful bark and raced toward him. Eli dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her fur. "Hey, girl, I missed you so much," he whispered, voice thick with happy tears. Marley licked his face, whining and spinning in delighted circles, pressing her head against Eli's chest as if trying to memorize his scent all over again. Eli's new parents, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, stood back, watching with warm smiles. They seemed gentle and attentive, exchanging a glance that spoke of hard-won trust. Diane welcomed them with cookies and lemonade, then quietly let Eli and Marley have their moment. For the next hour, Eli and Marley explored every inch of the house together. Eli visited the sunroom, beaming at the sign that read Marley's Spot, and carefully straightened the scarf he'd made her. "You look even more beautiful than last time," he told her, hugging her close. He noticed the backpack and bear and smiled. "You kept them, Diane." "Of course," Diane replied, her voice soft. "They're part of her, part of you. This will always be your home too, Eli." After a while, the adults gathered in the kitchen while Eli and Marley sprawled on the sunroom floor, a book open between them. Eli read aloud, his voice stronger and steadier than ever, Marley's head pillowed on his lap. The scene was so peaceful, so filled with a quiet joy, that Diane found herself blinking back tears. When it was time for Eli to leave, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small package. "I made something for Marley," he explained, holding up a new handmade bandana, this one embroidered in bright orange and green, her name stitched in big, proud letters. He knelt and gently tied it around Marley's neck, smoothing her fur. "This is so you never forget you have two families now, okay? You've got Diane, and you've always got me. I'll come visit as much as I can, but if you ever get sad, just look at this, and remember I love you." Marley nudged his hands with her nose, then, astonishing Diane, walked calmly back to her sunroom bed and curled up, the new bandana shining against her fur. She watched Eli with soft, knowing eyes, her tail wagging gently, as if she understood everything he was saying. Eli smiled at Diane, a little older and a little braver than the boy who'd left Marley in the snow. "I think she knows she's got two families now, that she's safe. Thank you for everything, Diane, for loving her when I couldn't." Diane knelt beside them. "You've given her so much, Eli, more than you know. And you always have a place here, both of you. Marley will always be waiting." Eli's new parents came to the doorway. "Ready, kiddo?" Eli knelt one last time, hugging Marley tight, whispering into her fur, "Be a good girl, okay? Take care of Diane. I'll be back." Marley gave one soft bark, just once, the way she had the first time they reunited in the park. Then she settled back onto her bed, her eyes gentle and content. As the car pulled away, Marley watched from the window, her tail wagging slowly, no longer frantic or worried, but peaceful. When Eli was out of sight, she turned, walked back to her bed, and rested her head on the bear, bandana bright against her fur. Diane sat beside her, stroking her ears. "You did so well, Marley. You made a choice today, one only the bravest hearts can make. You let yourself be loved by many." Later that evening, Diane updated the blog. She posted a photo of Marley in her new bandana, eyes bright and calm, with the caption, "Today, Marley learned she doesn't have to choose between families. Love makes room, and sometimes the happiest endings are the ones that welcome both what we keep and what we let go." The comments and messages poured in. Readers wrote of their own blended families, of the animals they'd loved and lost, and of the ways second chances had changed their lives. Marley's story had come full circle. What started with a plea for kindness in the cold now touched hearts far beyond Diane's little town. That night, as Marley slept, surrounded by her backpack, her bear, and her bandana, Diane realized what true family meant. It was not about blood or ownership, but about the courage to open your heart, to let go and trust, to be there for someone, even when you have to say goodbye. As the moon rose and cast its soft silver glow through the sunroom window, Diane whispered, "You're home, Marley? And so is Eli. And so am I." Mm. And in that peaceful moment, Diane knew some circles, once broken, could be made whole again, stitched together by hope, by healing, and by the simple, brave choice to love. The seasons turned again. The Oregon air, once heavy with lilac and rain, grew crisp and sharp. By early December, snow dusted the fields and rooftops, painting the small town in shades of white and silver. The world outside grew quiet. Fireplaces glowed behind curtains, and each house seemed to hold its breath against the coming cold. Diane stood at her living room window one evening, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the snow swirl under the streetlight by the old bus stop. It was nearly a year since she had first spotted the strange, lump-like shape in the snow, a memory now as familiar as her own reflection. In the hush of the house behind her, Marley snored softly by the fireplace, a gentle rhythm that had come to define the heartbeat of home. The sunroom, now Marley's corner, hour, was filled with gentle reminders of the journey they had taken together. The well-worn backpack, Eli's stuffed bear, the embroidered scarf and bandana that marked each turning point. Each item told a story of loss, of hope, of kindness offered and received. Marley's life had grown even richer in the months since Eli's visit. Her work as a therapy dog continued to inspire. Children flocked to read her stories. Hospital staff looked forward to her quiet visits. Diane's blog had reached more people than she could have ever imagined. Letters and emails arrived weekly, some sharing their own journeys through grief and healing, others simply offering thanks for reminding them to stop and care. Eli and his new family visited as often as they could. Sometimes they stayed for an afternoon, other times just long enough for Eli to hug Marley and tell her a new story, as each visit was both a homecoming and a gentle letting go. A reminder that love, once planted, could take root and grow in more than one place. Marley greeted Eli with her trademark joyful bark, but each time she settled back beside Diane afterward, her eyes clear, her heart at peace. One particularly cold night, Diane built a fire in the hearth and settled into her favorite chair with a novel. Marley curled at her feet, her head resting on the backpack as always. Outside, the snow began to fall heavier, swirling in thick flakes past the lamplight, just as it had that first night. The wind howled softly, but inside, the warmth was deep and lasting. Diane found herself reflecting on all that had happened. The strange, almost miraculous way one act of kindness had blossomed into 1,000 ripples of hope. She thought of the people Marley had helped, the shy children who had found their voice, the grieving parents who had felt comforted, the lonely neighbors who now smiled when they saw Marley on the street. Her mind returned to Eli, how he had found a new home, and yet remained forever a part of theirs. She remembered the courage it took to let Marley go, the faith it took to trust that the world could still be kind even after so much loss. The fire popped, sending sparks leaping up the chimney. Diane looked at Marley and felt a swell of gratitude, a gratitude so large it seemed to fill the room. She reached for her journal, her hand steady, and began to write. The world is full of things left behind, but not everything. Abandoned stays lost. Sometimes, if you're lucky, what's left behind finds a place warmer than where it started. Sometimes, love is a lamp in the cold, shining for the one who needs it most. She thought of all those who might read her words, people in cities and towns far away, some lonely, some waiting for something or someone to find them. She hoped Marley's story would be a reminder to look twice at the shapes in the snow, to stop for what seemed small, to offer shelter and patience and a second chance. Later, as the night grew deep and the fire turned to embers, Diane closed her eyes and listened to the soft sounds of Marley's breathing. She whispered, "You're safe, sweet girl. You're home." She imagined Eli, perhaps looking out his window at the same snow, thinking of Marley, feeling their connection stretch like a golden thread across the miles. And As sleep gently overtook her, Diane's final thought was simple. If this story touched you, don't turn away next time you see something small and waiting in the cold. Be the one who stops, the one who stays, the one who believes a little hope is enough to change a life. The snow continued to fall outside, softening the sharp edges of the world, while inside, Diane and Marley, joined by memory, love, and second chances, rested in a light that would never go out.